So from a program standpoint, I'll walk you through the mechanics of the program, what you can expect. Obviously, you had a good taste of it tonight. The idea is that every month you get a chance to meet with a different set of mentors. Those mentors are all startup founders and have built companies, grown companies, sold multiple companies in some cases, rolls out selling companies as a routine basis now. So there's a Slack channel. If any of you don't have that, all this information will come out to you in email tomorrow. The slides are now up on SlideShare, and I'll make sure I share the link with you. So all of this stuff, you don't have to take notes or do whatever. It's already out, and all the details will be up on my website. So dkparker.com, if you click on 6 Month Startup, Cohort 3 Seattle, all of the details and slides are there after we do every session. So the idea is I'm trying to make it as easy and accessible for you as possible. Tonight we're going to talk about competitive landscape, customer development, and awkward co-founder discussions, one of my favorite topics. And then I'm going to give you the deliverables and we'll break for next time. So somebody posted in the Slack channel the GeekWire thing about Dave left venture capital and went back to startups again, and the answer is that is very true. I recently left my second venture capital fund. There seems to be a trend here, don't really know. But the sixth company did just recently get incorporated. There'll probably be a seventh company this year too. But my background is of the 5 previous companies, I've sold 3, closed 2, which is decent math in startup world. All of them have been singles, so no billion-dollar home run or something like that. But there's always still hope. And then, as Katie mentioned, she and I worked together at Startup Weekend. So we did Startup Weekends worldwide. So we had about 1,265 events that we did my last full year there with 74,000 attendees in 120 countries. So, which was kind of a fun chance to go like change the world every day in a very startup mode. Working on a book for 6 Month Startup, same name as this. Somebody asked tonight, they're like, so how long is this program? I'm like, 6 months. And they're like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it's like, read the manual. So I've done eight transactions, so 6 sell-side deals and 2 buy-side deals. So exiting companies is kind of the fun part. It makes all the rest of the work that you do actually worthwhile, right? So getting to the point of a payoff. Why do I do this? It's kind of my community give back, and also to find great founders, because some of the ideas I'm launching this year I will not be CEO of. So I'm always looking for people who go through and show the progress in the process and learn great skills, but probably get to a point and they're like, hey, that idea is not a great idea. And I'm like, that's cool, but you know how to do the work. And about half of the people that start the program last month will be here in month 5. It's very deliberate. As you start going into this month and you do customer development, you have to do 25 customer interviews. One of the things that will get true very fast is I don't have to tell you you have a small idea or a bad idea. When the customers kind of go, huh? And you do 20 of them, you're like, oh, maybe I don't like this idea as much as I thought. So remember, for startups, passion is important, but not sufficient. So I'm glad you're passionate about your idea. That's why you're here. Data will help you make it sufficient. And the more customer interviews you do, the more that'll be helpful. So we went through ideation and research last month. If you're new this month, you can get the slides and the video from last month as well. So if you didn't get the homework done from last time, I would encourage you to still do it. The reason is that you can either do this work over the next 2+ years, or if you jam it all into 6 months and actually have the data inform your decisions, like what feature should we ship? If you have customer development interviews, you know. If it's you in your basement and you're thinking to yourself and your dog, the answer is it's not a very informed decision. So you're going to use this process to make very informed decisions. Next month, we'll talk about value proposition, features and benefits, and the expenses of building a product. The following month, we'll talk about revenues, sales, marketing, and monetization. This last month before pitches, we'll do product MVP and product market fit. But each of these months, you're going to have deliverables. So for example, when we get to features and benefits here in value props, I'm going to give you the instructions on how to write a specification so that you could go to Upwork, which is a vendor location you can find developers, and that you can post a job that somebody will actually help you understand how you're going to go build the product and how you're going to get it priced. So you're actually going to write the specification. You're going to use that specification to go find vendors. You're going to find 3 vendors, pay them to help you go through the process. So this is a very methodical way of going about it. So if you're not technical and you're looking for technical, there's a way to go do that. If you're technical, I'm going to push you the other direction so you get the business experience to know that the features you're actually shipping are actually the features customers want. Versus you're like, I'm just going to sit and code because I know what the customer wants. Not really the case anymore. So as we get to month 4, we'll talk about revenue models, how you make money, how you do sales and marketing. And that month, your deliverables will be pick the revenue model and figure out what you're going to do for marketing and sales. The idea of this on a monthly basis is these things are the things you have to do first, and they're really in sequence for a reason. You don't need to know how to make money, and you clearly don't need to know how to raise capital if you don't have a product or if you don't know your market. So how many of you weren't super impressed with your venture ready score? All right, so the good news about not being impressed with that score is you know where you're low, and over the next few months you're going to find the answers to those questions so you can get those scores up. So we actually use that matrix that we used at 7 Peaks. We actually scored all of the companies that came through and actually applied. We scored them all as a team. Because part of what we were after was like, well, how come I scored it differently than Michael did? What does he know about the industry that I don't know? But we also wanted to use it so we could give feedback to the founders and say, hey, here's some feedback. Maybe you didn't explain this thing, maybe you didn't think about it before, but we actually want to give you feedback and help you improve, versus most of the thing that happens in the venture world today, especially in Seattle, but not just in Seattle, is you'll walk out of a meeting and someone will go, that was awesome, good job, let me know when you get traction. And you're like, you walk out of the meeting, you're like, woo, that was a great meeting. And the answer was, no, it wasn't. They just patted you on the head, right? And the answer that you need to get is like, tell me where I could improve. So the idea of your venture score at the beginning, and then you're going to do your venture score at the end. And by the way, all of your peers are going to score your pitches on the last night as well. So when you walk away going, I got a 40, and everybody else is like, you got a 26. And you're like, what? I thought I got a 40. So, because there's value in self-awareness, especially if you're going to decide to go raise money. We talked about mechanics for tonight. So, a couple rules of the road for those of you who are new. Techstars uses the hashtag #GiveFirst. This is a good chance for you. You all have different skills. There's people around the tables that have different skills than you have. You can help them. So, give first. Don't take first. So the plus side of it is if you come with that attitude to it, you'll have a lot that you'll get to contribute. So next is don't ramble, because I will definitely interrupt. I have no hesitations. So for those of you who are last month, you remember. Use this as a chance to build your network and get to know the folks around the table before you need them. So it's good to have friends before you actually need the friends. So this is your chance to network, get to know folks. And this is just a great way to do that in between. And you'll have some 2-week interim between the program. You'll get a chance to get together with other folks around the table as well and have some of your deliverables that you have a chance to touch base during the halfway point. I'm not going to do your work. I'm not going to check the work for you. And like we said earlier, mentor access is based on doing the work. So if you do the work, cranking, awesome, that's great. If you don't do it, then, don't ask the mentor for personal coffee, because the answer is go do this work first. And some of you love you, but I need you to understand something. If I had coffee with every one of you in the next 4 weeks, I would be jacked up, right? So this is my way to get through one-on-one coffees and say, finish the program, and I'm happy to have coffee with you. But finish the program first. Not that I don't care about you, it's just that I have a lot of things on my time. And if you've done the work, then the answer is I can help you a lot. But if you're like, oh yeah, I met and I quit in month 2 because I didn't want to do customer interviews, the answer is I don't really need to meet with you yet. Because you need to go do that work first before I can point you to the right venture capitalist or the right angel investor group. Okay? So that's my requirements. We did mentor feedback, introductions, did that. Break, did that. Okay. So hopefully some of the work that you did in the last 30 days has narrowed your focus a bit on what ideas you want to pursue. So that's kind of the contention of, as we do this process, we went from ideation, now we're going to go to customer development and research. So I'm going to have you build out over the next 30 days a competitive landscape that you're going to continue to track. So, and in this competitive landscape, you've already kind of started this, but we're going to just expand on it. So you're going to take a names of the competitors. You're going to put in their URLs. You're going to put in a TechCrunch link. For those of you who don't know TechCrunch yet, or Crunchbase is an accurate way. They're going to look at who's raised how much money in the space that you're in. And the reason for it is, the reason I have you do that structured introduction is because when investors meet with you, they're like, oh, is this my type of deal or not? And if you wander off on your story and your history and all kinds of different things, you're like, I'm just trying to figure out if like this is my kind of deal. Like as a venture fund, we did business to business investments. So if you had a B2C deal, my answer was, I'm out. It doesn't mean your idea is not good. It just means I'm out. We don't invest in business to consumer businesses. We invest in business to business businesses. We like enterprise. We don't really know that much about consumer. We like healthcare IT. So the idea that you're going through that initial introduction is the investors just want to know if are you my type of deal or not? And that's the fastest way to get through that. Word to the wise here, you don't actually want to meet with investors who will never invest in you. Like you want to filter those out up front. So Nick and I have been working with the WTIA cohort, and you'll learn more about that at some point in the future here. But one of the things I was like, qualify your investors in advance before you do the meeting. And do you invest in this type of deal? Have you invested in this type of deal before? Do you have a track record of understanding the industry? And people are like, Dave, you can ask those questions, but I can't. I'm like, no, you can ask those questions because if they've never invested in this market before that you're going into and they know nothing about it, they're never going to write you a check. So you've wasted the time in the meeting, and it would be better to say, hey, is this the type of investment you have made in the past? Yes or no? Are you currently making investments? Yes or no? Because you want to know those things. Because keep in mind, venture capitalists, especially associates at venture capital firms and people who are new to the industry, they get paid to take meetings. That's what they do. Because they want to see you early in the process. And we were having this discussion with the panel for WTIA. We had some of the bigger venture capital funds up in the panel. And they're like, hey, so when should we meet you with you? And like, we really want to meet you early. And they're like, okay, what's your average size check? $5 million. Well, we're way too early for that. Well, yeah, but we still want to meet with you. You guys don't want to meet with them. Like, go meet with people who write a check for what you want to do now, not for somebody who's going to do a check later at $5 million. So you need to make the most use of your time because your time is the thing that you have to manage most, since it's the thing you have for scarcity. Okay? All right. So you're going to do your competitor URL, Crunchbase. How much have they raised? How many people are on the team? What are their features? And some notes about the competition. And you're going to keep building that list. The worst possible pitch is when I go to Michael and say, hey, Michael, here's my new idea, blah, blah, blah. And he says, oh, you're kind of like these guys. And you're like, who are those guys? Right? I mean, that's super embarrassing. It's particularly embarrassing if they have raised $100 million already and they have completely sucked the oxygen out of the room that you think you're going into. So every time you're looking for competition, you want to keep all of the competition up there, and this becomes a very active list you're building from time to time. Okay? You're going to right mouse click on the website, and you're going to look at the data. So you're going to look at things like keywords and the metadata. And if you're not technical, this is super easy to do. And you're going to go to page info on the right mouse click, and it's going to give you what keywords they have at the top of their page, which is going to inform your decision about how you should put keywords into your SEO for your site. So for those of you who don't know SEO, basically that's the shortcut around what SEO should I have on my site? Go to your biggest competitor, do a right mouse click, and copy it. So put them all into that spreadsheet and just start to build out your form because it'll inform your decision on it. So these are tools that you can use: SEMrush, Topic Explorer, Google Keywords tool, obviously, and a local one here that tracks your competitors is Rival IQ. So there's all things that you can use for free editions that are right there. And again, you guys will get all these links tomorrow when I push it out on email, but it'll be on the website. From a competition standpoint, one of the things I would encourage you to start to look at is what are their feature lists? Like when you look at their positioning, what features do they list first? Especially if you have larger competitors, they've already done A/B testing and they know what converts. So know that some of that testing has been done, and if it's been done before, there's no sense in you duplicating the effort and starting from scratch. Use what they've already learned. But look at how they position their product, how they position their features, and things like their pricing. How are they positioning their pricing? So, and you'll find that there's markets that are adjacent to yours. So maybe a company is, they're kind of like us in how they sell it, but they're selling to a different market. Great. That just completely informs how you want to look at it. Who do they address as their target customer and profile? So this is starting, the early edition of doing research is starting where you're going to go in the next couple months with your product positioning next month, based on the fact that you're doing all the research this month on the competition. One of the things I would encourage you to do is to use the Internet Archive and use what's called the Wayback Machine. So if you look back at a particular company and you look back 6 months, 12 months, 18 months plus, you will see how their product positioning has changed. Or go back to their very first cached page. And you'll be like, oh, we were going to position our product that way too. Look how much they've changed. Because sometimes there's an oh shit moment with that where you're like, we were going B2B and then we decided to go B2C and they started as B2C and then went to B2B. You may want to look at how that page has changed over time. And it's free, it's just there. And you can go back and look at how their product positioning has changed, how their pricing has changed, how their offer has changed, and even their positioning has changed. So it'll save you a ton of time, and you may as well leapfrog in front of them into what you already know to be the case. So in most cases, they've done A/B testing there as well, and some of the new stuff will probably be informed by that. So quick note on naming and branding. At this point, naming and branding is a little bit of a rabbit trail. So for those of you who know marketing, and how many of you own more than 10 URLs? All right, my name's Dave, I have a problem. So I have about 150 URLs. So I can look back to the last couple of years and go, I don't even remember what idea I was working on when I bought that. So now they're going down, just so you know. I'm in a program and they're going down. But like there's ideas that I'm like, I don't even remember what the idea was. So before you spend money on domain names or things like that, just the mechanics here are really simple. So take a brand that you like, the idea of a brand or the company name that you like, Google it. Make sure there's nothing completely negative, like it doesn't, oh, that's a phrase that people use in porn I didn't know about. That would be bad, right? So does somebody already get huge traffic in that tool or in that name, right? So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at trademark on so uspto.gov has a TESS trademark search. Again, it's free. So you can go in and type in the name after you've done the Google search first, right? Then you can go in and say, does anybody have the trademark on this name next? So, and then you can go to a tool called NameCheck, and it's just basically a tool that allows you to check all domain name extensions plus all social media followings. Don't start there, because if somebody already owns the trademark, you've just wasted a ton of time. Right? So again, from a rabbit trail perspective, be cautious about how you spend your time here, because you're going to be that person who spent the entire weekend looking at domain names and you're like, the sun has come up and gone down, my kids have been out, like it's bad. So it can take a ton of time. So right now you just need something that works and can be a placeholder. Ultimately, if you're wildly successful and you bought a .co name, you can come back later and spend bigger money on the .com name. So the team that owns startups.com started with startups.co. I never asked Will how much he paid for startups.com. I'm sure it was expensive, but he had a business before he did it. The important thing was he could buy startups.co fairly cheap in the early days and then went back and bought the .com name later. So you can do that too. It's a better use of time, and frankly, from a resource perspective, given limited resources that you have right now, you know, should you spend $16,000 on a domain name? No. Do you know anybody who's ever spent $16,000 on a domain name? You do now. Now, I sold it for more than that, but it was the net present value probably wasn't a good use of cash, right? But don't go spend money on those things. Spend money on research and validating your idea and driving traffic, right? And you can do that with very little cash. So if you have any other tools that you all like that you use, feel free to put them out in the Slack channel as well. I'm happy to put them up for both the book content and for the organization. But there's some great tools here like Lean Domain Search and Name Checker too that will help you look for common names. And WordDroid, if you're not a marketer at all and you're like, I have no idea how to name this you can put in your adjectives that you're after and some of the keywords you're after, and it will give you some word combinations. They may not be good, but it will give you a place to start. So how many of you are marketers in the room? All right, for those of you who are not marketers, one more time, marketers, raise your hand. For those of you who are not marketers, make sure you get to know who those people are. How many of you are technical in the room? All right, for those of you who are not technical, now you know who to look to around the room. So the rest of you have business? Yeah? Okay, all right. So it's actually a pretty interesting mix. All right, so that's just some quick things on naming and branding. Don't spend a whole bunch of time on it right now. The idea that you need to work on right now is validate the idea, worry about naming and branding later. So you can work with a domain that is cheap and fairly easy to stand up, and in the next couple of months we'll get to how to build an MVP site and go test traffic with that minimum viable product from a site and positioning perspective first, right? All right, so this basics on customer research or competitive analysis and competitive research, just start to build that out and get familiar by reading everybody else's stuff first. Don't get infatuated with your own ideas first. Go out and see what else the market's doing. All right, so customer development is really customer validation. So Steve Blank and Eric Ries really came up with this combination. Steve Blank wrote about originally Eric Ries was Steve's best student who really popularized it. Steve Blank was on our board when I was at Startup Weekend. So the idea that this came from Stanford's D School, and design thinking was their original crash course, and I would encourage you to just learn more about it. But like a lot of things in 6 Month Startup, I'm going to do a flyover a bunch of stuff that you can come back and learn in detail about later. It's really the idea of 6 Month Startup is you want to go prove the idea or kill it fast. So don't fail fast, but kill bad ideas fast, because you don't want to spend 3 years of your life working on an idea that's not going to scale, right? That's just it would be tragic. So I'd rather have you, and then you can go back and go deep into any of these subjects. So if you like the design school stuff, it's great information. It's super helpful. So Lean Startup, and what Eric really built in Lean Startup was, if you have traffic, he would do a lot of test and design and build. But you all probably don't have 1,000 people visiting your website every month right now, let alone every week or every day. So Eric's process is really more up market from where most of you are at. So it's a great book. I would encourage you to read it. There's some great sections on minimum viable products. Again, super great resource. Steve's book is, I'll include a link to it. It's in there as the Startup Owner's Manual. It's very academic. Right, so it's very expensive because it's a classic academic textbook, and it's complete. The problem is you probably won't get through it. So great resource. And then Agile is a software development methodology for the most part, and people tend to blend these two things together. So if you hear somebody say, "Oh, we're doing Agile" or "We're doing Lean," the answer is generally the same idea: is what's the smallest thing we need to prove out that this idea will work. And that's what you're after. And typically every month you're going to walk away and go, I think there's one thing I need to prove in the next 30 days. Does the customer care? How do we acquire customers? And it's not can I build the product? In fact, it's almost never can I build it? The question is almost always should I build it? So the data that you're going to gather from customer development answers that question, should you do it, not can you do it? All right, so from a design thinking perspective, this is a little bit academic, so I'll cruise over it. But the idea is I'm going to ideate, I'm going to prototype, and I'm going to test. Probably the better example from Lean is, you know what, I'm going to let you guys read over this because it's a good process of understanding what the industry talks about. But you all need to know it in a cursory level enough so you can go figure out that what I'm really trying to do is figure out what features need to be in my minimum viable product. So this is Steve's example from 4 Steps of an Epiphany. The idea is I do customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation, and ultimately company building. This is all at the early stage of where you all are at. which is really going out and doing customer interviews and getting an idea of what it is the customer really wants. So the process here is really, I would combine these two and say it's really just customer validation. So here's the net of that as it applies to fundraising. If you have an opinion and I have an opinion and you show up so March 20th, if you're at a point where you think, I want to pitch angels, we run an event called Startups Meet Angels. So 8 to 10 companies will pitch. It'll be at Create 33 on March 20th. But you have to have a team, a product, and some sort of traction. That's our filter, right? So if you have a team, product, and traction, you'll probably get to pitch. If you don't have a team, and you don't have a product, and you don't have traction, my goal is to not have you hurt yourself by talking about all the great things you're going to do with angel investors who are like, okay, but you don't have a product yet, or you don't have a team yet, right? So what we're really trying to do is if you have an opinion and I have an opinion, but I have a checkbook, I win. If you have an opinion and I have an opinion, but you've interviewed 50 customers or potential customers, and 45 of them said they would pay you to do this, my opinion doesn't really count. I'm like, tell me more, right? Because you have data, but you have to go out and do the interviews to actually get the data. You can't just have an opinion. And that's where data wins in this at all cases. So later, this is just more of a friend of mine did a great diagram on it, but frankly, it's too far away for most of you to get it, and it's more gestalt of the whole big picture process. So anybody ever heard the Henry Ford quote? If I asked customers what they wanted, they'd say a faster horse. Do you know that was before the internet? So this is my grandfather's shop in 1911 in Camas, Washington. This is the Ford dealer in Camas, Washington from 1911. So this is my grandfather. What's that? I don't know. I wasn't around. He sold this too early. He did start the first phone company in southwestern Washington, and then he sold that too early. And he finished his career running a little local grocery store. So if any of you watch the History Channel, I'm kind of a History Channel. I like the History Channel. So in 1911, they didn't have the assembly line. They sent the parts of the car out to these remanufacturing facilities where the car would be manufactured. So you'll notice this is early Model T. The gas station is right here because there was no gas infrastructure for the cars, right? So when somebody says, well, you know, I'm doing a startup and I don't have to talk to customers because if I ask customers what they wanted, nah, not the case anymore. You're going to go make an informed decision by talking to your customers and actually learning what they want. And you're going to do it, you can't outsource it to a salesperson. You're not going to do it on a mechanical Turk. You're going to sit down across from somebody, and when you ask them the question, you're going to see if their pupils dilate and if they get excited about like, oh, that's really interesting. By the way, the answer of meh, that's bad. Meh means you're a nice person and I'm glad you bought me coffee, but I'm not interested or I don't understand what you want. And human nature is such, when you ask questions, they're going to tell you kind of what you want to hear. And we're going to give you a slightly different methodology for doing this. And because the last question you're going to ask everyone is, if this was to fail, why would it fail? And most founders don't actually want to know, right? Because we have one idea and it's precious and we love it and it's beautiful. And if somebody criticizes it, it's really bad. But you're gonna flip that model, because the answer is, if something's going to fail, do you want to know now, in 6 months, or in 6 years? I want to know now. So you're going to include that in part of your customer development interviews is, hey, if this was to fail, why would it fail? So that becomes part of your process of making those decisions. So your focus doing customer development interviews is starting with the problem you're solving. So Clayton Christensen wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, and one of the things he says is, it's what is the job to be done? So your customer is hiring you for a job to be done. So what is that job to be done? So don't focus on the product yet. Focus on the problem first. So here's what I found over and over again running this and then running Startup Weekend. People are like, we have a product. The product's amazing, but we don't really know who our customer is. Okay, I can tell you where that's going to end up. Where if you start with the problem and you have an acute focus on the problem, you can pivot your product around that problem. But if you start with a product first, and then the answer is, and then I'm trying to find a customer that this applies to. Does this work for you? Is this a problem for you? And you're like, no, I want to start with problem first and very acute focus on the problem. So do the customers care? When you sit down and ask them the question, you're like, is this a problem? Don't do the monologue. I know this is a problem for you. No, you can't lead the witness. You want to say, so this is the market we're in. We're thinking about doing this. If we did that, would that be useful? Is that a problem for you first? And if we built that, would you use it? And if they're like, then you need to drill into, so is it not a problem? So how about, is there any other problem around that category you want to tell me about now that I've not landed it, right? But you want to start around the problem first and then go to solution. So if there's something they want, what is it they want? So one of the things we did in my first startup was we were helping small businesses, which were IT companies, and we're like, we're going to roll out this program. We're going to help them find new customers. And then we went out and did the customer development surveys, and most of our customers are like, hey, if we could help bring new customers to you, would you want that? And the answer was, meh. And we're like, what? Why wouldn't you want new customers? And they're like, well, we're a services company. It's the three of us. If you gave us one new customer, we'd have to hire a fourth person. Then our profitability would go down. So you'd really have to give us 2 or 3 new customers so we could afford to hire a new person. And I'm like, so what you really want is more time to go to your kid's soccer game on Saturday. They're like, oh yeah, that would be great. If you could tell me how to do that, that would be awesome. It had nothing to do with wanting new customers or more revenue. It had to do with the pain the job I'm being hired to do was free up more of my time so I could go to more of my kids' stuff. So don't give them the monologue that leads them a direction. Ask them if there's a problem that they're trying to solve. In your business, is there a problem like this? So what you're going to end up with for this is a Google form. And your Google form is going to start at generic and go to specific. So my favorite example with this was T.A. McCann, and T.A. will come in as a mentor one of these times. T.A. is a mechanical engineer by background, and he's at PSL, Pioneer Square Labs now. And I've watched TA work the room. Hey, my name's TA, blah, blah, blah. And he's going through the checklist in his head. Are you my target customer profile or not? And if he gets 2 questions, 3 questions in and you're not, it's like, oh, awesome. Hey, my name's Dave. Nice to meet you. And he's going through the same set of questions, right? And in his head, he's already outlined those questions. You're going to do the same thing on a Google form. And when you sit down with a potential customer, you're going to ask them that set of questions. Hey, are you this type of customer or that type? Because are you qualified to be a customer or not qualified to be a customer? We're looking at launching a company that is going to build a product that does this. Is that something that's a problem for you or not? They're like, oh, tell me more about it. Then you got to explain it some more, right? And if they say, no, it's not really a problem for me. You don't have to keep asking them questions. They've already said, I'm not one of your target customers. So now you're going to the next person and saying, are you a target customer? And if you get through the first 5 and none of them are target customers, you have a slightly different issue, right? Which means who you thought was your target customer is not. So now you have a point of like, before I keep doing more of these, what is it I've not learned here? What is it that isn't mapping to what I expected? Which is why we said, who's your target, your TAM, SAM, and SOM? Who is that? What's that target customer look like? Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
So I know there's a logical answer to this, but it almost sounds like the process you're using is by saying, are you my target customer? You have a solution in mind already that you're trying to see, is this person going to benefit from what I built?
Right.
But 5 minutes ago you told us, don't think about what you want to build, first think about the problem. How do you go about finding people that have the problem if if you're introducing yourself to someone who you think might benefit from your product?
Great question. So the question is, if you're interviewing people and you're starting with a problem, the audience is really the big question. So in the case of TA example, is like he was at a trade show specifically that had mostly target customers who he thought would be the target customer. Okay. So you have to put yourself into, most of the time you're not going to be able to show up at the mall and go, are you my target customer? Are you my that's not going to work. So what you're after is, you should have a hypothesis in your head about who the target customer is for your business. Business to business, business to consumer. If it's B2C, it's an age demographic, gender, etc. If it's B2B, it's what's their role, what's their title, what type of company. right? And then what you're going to do is go find that list of people, maybe through LinkedIn if it's B2B, maybe through Facebook if it's B2C. How many of you are doing business to consumer? Interesting. Okay. So business to business? Not sure? Fair? Okay. All right. So the big thing here is in order for you to get a data set, you have to pick a hypothesis of your target customer until you prove yourself wrong. So, because you can't go interview everybody. So the idea is and you may go from this month to next month, and you're like, our target customer is a business that does this. Great. And you're like, we did the first 10 customer interviews, and the answer was, nope, that's not our target customer. Great, now you know. But if your answer is, everybody's my target customer, then you're going to interview a whole bunch of random people, and you're going to have no viable data to actually know what you're comparing to. So you should have a hypothesis that says, our target customer looks like this. Here's the type of customer they are. Here's how much they spend in IT if they're a business. Here's how much they spend as a consumer, right? If it's a parent, if it's, right, whatever that demographic is, you just have to pick one and go down that path until you find that you're wrong, right? And then you're going to go adjacent market and adjacent market. You're like, is it wrong because it's just wrong, like the whole idea is wrong? Or is it wrong because I went after the wrong target customer? So what your first set is, go after that target customer. If you find out you're wrong, look for the adjacent target customer. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So you're going to have a hypothesis. When you go out and talk with them, you're going to talk about what you think the features are going to be. What is the feature and the corresponding benefit? So hold that thought. So the idea here is you can't just talk about feature, because people are like, you're telling me about a product that doesn't exist and I've never seen before. Tell me what it will do for me. I'm back to that job to be done thing. If I used your app, your website, your whatever it is, what will it do for me? So lead with benefits, not with features. We have a login page. I don't care. Everybody has a login page. Shouldn't it be in your demo? No. Well, we use Google to log in. It was super cool functionality. I built it over the weekend. Don't care. Care about the benefit. What will it do for me? Why will I use it? Why will I tell my friend about it? Why will I be like, hey, Michael, I found this amazing thing. They do this. Like, why will anybody talk about it? Right? So start with what's the benefit to the user now that you have a hypothesis on who the user is. Yeah?
So in regards to that, would you set up your interview questions open-ended or more with options where, okay, this is the question, these are your 4 options.
Yeah, great. It's actually, I actually have a detailed out for you with the Google form, but you're going to go open-ended to specific. And the idea that you're after, if you think about this as an outcome, you're going to go, in the next 30 days, you're going to do 20 plus customer interviews. Really, they're prospect interviews, but customers, customer's not a customer until they pay for something, just so you know. So, and founders merge this one together and like, oh, we have like 20 customers. And you're like, wow, you got 20 customers who are paying? Oh, no, we just talked to 20. Like, that's not a customer. But in the startup lingo, we call it customer development, so that's why it's stuck. You're going to go general to specific, but you're also going to capture Dave's name and Dave's interest level and Dave's email address. And what you're going to start to build every month is you're going to go from 0 people on your email list in MailChimp to 20 people to 40 people to 150 people. Because then after you've met them and you have a survey question you really want to send, you can send out a list of 150 people and go, hey, this is the progress we made over the last month. We're thinking about shipping this feature. Dave, you said you'd want to be on my list. You send that out and I'm like, hey, that's a really cool feature. I'd like it. Or no, I wouldn't like it. Right? So what you're doing is you're building a list that you can then survey at a later time. So every one of those interviews, if they're qualified, you're going to ask, hey, Dave, by the way, I'm going to send out a monthly update about our progress with the company. Is it okay if I keep you on my list? And most of the time the answer is going to be yes. If you know they're not qualified, don't ask them. That is the start of a vanity metric that will kill you in startup land. Right? You're like, oh, my emails list is amazing. It's completely filled with non-qualified customers. You're like, don't do that to yourself. You're using this to build out a list. So for a lot of you, if you had a list today and you had 1,000 people you could outreach, you'd be like, this would be super helpful if I had a list of 1,000. This month, you're going to start to build that list of 1,000, right? So that's the process. All right. At some point then in the future, you're going to say, hey, we're thinking about this feature or this feature. Could you rank it for me? So here's 3 features. tell me which one you'd want to see first. You're probably too early for that question right now, so you're more generic around like, is this a problem area? Are you currently using any online tools to do this today? How much are you paying to do that? Or so for a lot of you, the competitive option is status quo, which is doing nothing. Or I use Excel. So anybody ever use Smartsheet? Okay, so Smartsheet's great because it was one of those built from ground up to replace Excel. So all the stuff that people were using Excel for, like to-do lists and moving items, right? So Smartsheet became the tool that said, you don't have to use Excel for that because you're not calculating anything. You can use Smartsheet for it, right? So in most of the time, if you're building something that's new, the option is paper, calendars, right? Stuff I'm doing today because I don't know there's a product that's an option. So, all right. So just great timing on your question. So you're going to create a Google form. The Google form is going to have your company name. You're going to do a set of structured questions that are going to go from easy to hard, from open-ended to specific. And tonight you're going to work on what those questions are for you. So what the question you want to know is, what do you really want to know? So the first thing you want to know is, I have a hypothesis, this is my target customer. In my first 5 to 10 customer interviews, I want to figure out if that really is my target customer or not. Is it women this age? Is it IT managers that are at big companies? Is it small and medium business owners? Like, who do you think that target customer is? Because again, if you do 20 customer interviews across 20 people who are completely different, you're going to come back next month being, I did 20 customer interviews and I learned nothing. And the answer is, well, let's go back to target customer. If you interviewed 20 completely different people, you are going to learn nothing. So I would rather have you do 5 of each target customer profiles, find out that, oh, that was wrong, and then do the next 5 on a different customer. Make sense from a customer profile perspective? So what you want to know first is this my target customer or not? Ultimately, what you're after, and it may be too early in some cases, depending on where you're in the process, will they pay for it or not? So one of the biases people have, and I was talking with one of the groups earlier about this, was Brian Starbuck, who's a guy here in town who has done a bunch of startups as well. Brian was doing a company that helped you as a parent work with your child to do curated videos to help them understand their career path, right? And he went out and did customer interviews left and right, and all the parents were like, oh, that would be awesome. Yes, I would pay for that. So Brian went and built it and shipped it and went back and said, okay, it's built, it's ready to go. It's $9.95 a month. And then all of a sudden people are like, oh, I'm not going to pay $9.95 a month for it. Because the right thing to do as a parent was to say, I want to invest in my kids. But when it came time to actually swipe it, the answer was, well, I don't want to invest in that much. So be aware of how you ask leading questions for customer development, because sometimes the right thing to say may lead you down the wrong path. So one of the things I want to know is, hey, if you were to use a tool like this, what would you pay for it? Or what are you paying for this today? Well, I kind of use this tool and that tool, and so it's like, or I don't really use that. It's kind of Excel, right? Well, if something was like 10 times better, would you pay for it? Well, maybe. Okay, how much would you pay for it? It's not an informed decision, but you're looking for general guidance, right? Especially if the IT manager, keep in mind, no small business or IT manager has budget. So you don't want to say, how much budget do you have for this today? The answer is they don't have any budget, right? It's a new product. They didn't know it exists. So you're like, compared to your alternatives, what would you, if you were buying a product like this today that you already buy, how much do you spend a month on that? So this is obviously fairly generic, because if you're B2C and B2B, these are really different questions. So you're going to go through an exercise here in the next few minutes to start to write out your list of questions to go through it. And the last question is, if this is to fail, why would it fail? And again, this is like a dagger to the heart for founders. Because I'm like, I don't want to ask that question because they might tell me. I'm like, I want to know. So I have an idea that I've been working on. It'll be the one we just incorporated. I've been trying to kill this idea for a year, right? And at the end of every interview, I'm like, so if this was to fail, why would it fail? So I had one person in 38 interviews go, oh, it would fail because of this. I've had a bunch of people go, yeah, I don't really know about the market size. I'm like, legit answer. But I'm like, if it was to fail, and I got one person like, this is why it would fail. I'm like, that's super useful. In fact, that's the most useful feedback versus the person who was like, I'm super enthusiastic for you. You're going to do another startup. I'm like, not what I asked. Like, What I asked is, if it was to fail, why would it fail? So that's going to be your last question you ask. And again, neutral is the way you want to approach this, not guiding the witness. Okay? Everybody seen Google Forms before? Do you know what a Google Form is? No. Okay. So Google Forms is basically a free service that you can use for Google. You just type in Google Forms on a browser. It'll bring you to a login page. And it's basically an online survey. I would encourage you not to give it to somebody and have them fill it out. You just fill it out on a tablet or your phone as you're going through and interviewing them the questions. So here's the reason. After you do 100 of these, you're going to forget what that person said. Like your first 5, you're like, I don't need to do Google Forms. Dave, you don't understand. No, when you have 150 of these, the answer is, I'm looking to put these pieces of data together, and I'm going to stand back and look at the 150 surveys and go, is there something here I'm not seeing? And if you don't capture the data in a form, the answer is you will lose it. So be systematic about it. You can change your form and update it as you go, but what you're after is you want to go survey those 20, 40, 100, ask them for the option to be on the email list. We'll talk about that later, right? But you want to go capture that data and build a data set, not anecdotal, right? There's a big difference between like, I've talked to a bunch of random people and this is kind of what they said, okay? The interested parties, you're going to ask at the end of every question, hey, can I keep you on my list and put you on the monthly update? Monthly updates are amazing because I'm looking for, like when more mature companies come around, I'm looking for what are you learning? You know, did you make progress every month? So this isn't a 2-week sequence, this isn't a 2-month sequence, this is a monthly sequence. If you get to the end of the month and you go to write by the way, you're going to calendar this on your calendar with a monthly reminder to do this. It's going to be at the 1st of the month. And if you get to the 31st of the month and the monthly update's due and you're like, I have nothing to say, it means you're not spending enough time on your idea. Or it means the idea is not really that good and you just haven't been honest with yourself about it. Both of those are okay, right? Again, I'm trying to save you, like I have a bunch of people who are like, I bailed out in month 4. I'm like, congratulations. They're like, you're enthusiastic. I'm like, sure. I'd rather have you quit at month 4 and go find another idea than spend 3 years on a dumbass idea, right? Because you're not going to get that time back. So, 2-week format, monthly format is what's the right way to do it. 2 weeks is when you get closer to product launch. You're going to move from a monthly sequence to a 2-week sequence because your dev cycle is typically 2 weeks. And at that point, I want to have a list of people who are like, am I going to ship this feature or that feature? Am I going to do this thing or am I going to do that thing? And that cadence becomes a much more urgent cadence, but that's when you're getting closer to launch. So you're going to make progress, but you need to be on top of the fact that am I making these calls, doing these meetings or not? By the way, for the business-to-business folks, doing 20 in the next 30 days is going to be hard because I don't know if I can get on Michael's calendar. Like I know I can find people on LinkedIn, but can I get on their calendar to do it? So consumers, a little bit easier, but don't be surprised. Don't wait for the last 3 days to try to get your 20 interviews in. It ain't gonna happen, okay? Couple of things, what not to do. You are not the customer. You maybe like the customer, but you are not the customer. You are defined by your confirmation bias that you've already selected to be here, which means you're already biased to the answer. So remember, you're not the customer in the first place. Don't go with a small data set. Please don't. So if you think about this, the trajectory of your growth of a company, the number of interviews you jam into the next 5 months will impact by years the time it takes you to get successful. If you wait to do 100 interviews and it takes you a year to do it and you have no momentum to do it, you will fumble around trying to figure out what feature you want. And then you'll ship a feature and you'll have your entire dev team ship a feature that nobody wanted. It is demoralizing to a dev team. And then the next time you're like, I am super enthusiastic about this feature. They're like, yeah, no, right? Because they don't want to ship something that nobody's going to use. So know what the feature is, and that's what you get confirmation in the data. We talked about biases, no rhetorical questions. Isn't this amazing? Please don't do that. You can't do blind surveys, and I mentioned earlier, you just can't outsource it. So you can't hire a salesperson to do this. As a founder, you're the product manager until you hire one, which is going to be a ways away. And if you're not a product manager, congratulations, you now have a new role. And that's your kind of your number one role over the next year plus, is to be the product manager and the product advocate and evangelist. And if you do it well, you're going to be super close to the customer. If you don't do it well, that's a problem. So B2B, you're going to do 25. If you're business to consumer, you're going to do about 50 over the next month. And like I said, this answer, that equals it's a bad. If you're like, hey, do you love this? And their answer is, meh, that is not good. So go find another one. All right. So quick note on fundraising here, because I think it's important to, and I mentioned this, just kind of the opinions and checkbooks. But if you have data, you can get to money. But again, this is back to, if you wait 6 more months to do this and a year to do this, versus you're like, I've interviewed 100 people and they said 87 of them said they would pay for it. Awesome, that's great. You should go build something. If you're like, I've interviewed 8 people, then you need to go do more interviews. So the faster you get it done, the more important that is. So this is a good repeat after me exercise. Hi, my name is? I'm an entrepreneur. Half my ideas are great. Half my ideas are crap. Let's go test this one. So if you have a team, by the way, this is a super useful tool, because the team never wants to argue with a founder, right? Early days especially, they're like, they're product evangelists, they know where they're going. And I just want you to remind you that, listen, I'm perpetually testing ideas. And I want to know if they're going to fail fast, right? I don't want to fail fast, but I want to know if the idea is going to fail fast, because failing's expensive. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. I had one that was a major crater, because back in the early days of the internet, you had to raise a shit ton of money, unlike today where I'm like, yeah, we could buy that for $500 a month on Salesforce, which cost us $250,000 to install, right? So if you're gonna have a failure, you want to know about it as early as possible. So this is all one big test, and what you're going to do is go find out where things are wrong and find out where your expectations aren't in line with what you thought they were going to be. We talked about this a little bit about having a hypothesis versus a fact. You're just always testing, right? And again, you're going to set the hypothesis on who the target customer is, and if you're wrong, you're wrong. It's all good, right? But you're going to pivot that to the next, come back to the problem, and keep iterating around the problem. All right, so what I'm going to have you do is take a few minutes right now and write down what you think your top 5 questions are. Like, what do you want to know about your customer development interview surveys? Because that will be the first 5 questions. So things are going to be like, are you your target customer? If you're my target customer, how am I going to capture that data? What's your job title? What type of company do you work for? If it's B2C, is it demographic? Is it age? What do you want to know about the target customer? What do you want to know about the solutions they're using today? So make your first cut at your top 5 questions that you're going to use for your Google form. It'll take about 5 minutes to do that. It's really just drafting it while top of mind. Yep?
Back to the customer profile.
Uh-huh.
When you're working on a marketplace, I would say booking.com kind of business.
Yep.
You've got 2 different, you're both B2B and B2C, you've got 2 different kinds of customer profiles.
So, well, you will be one or the other typically, as far as launch goes. So if you're doing, anybody else doing a marketplace? So marketplaces typically, you can find, you have to have a product there to sell first, right? So you focus on the sell side product first, target who that customer is, because you can generate, the idea is on a marketplace, I can generate more buy side customers, even if they're going to come there once and never not find the product they're after. So the important thing with a marketplace is you're going to disproportionately weight to the seller first. So start with who's my target seller, because then you can go, once you know that one, you can go back and go, who's my target buyer? But at mature marketplaces, they're in equilibrium. At launch marketplaces, they are not in equilibrium. They're focused on sellers. Okay? All right, so take about 5 minutes to do that. Other questions, yeah? Yeah, so month 4, we're going to talk about pricing pretty extensively and a pricing framework. Right now, what you're after is just kind of orders of magnitude for what somebody might pay for something, right? Because you're informing that, yeah, that would be cool if it's $1 versus $100. Like, how big is the problem is what you're trying to get to. We'll talk extended about pricing in month 4. Yeah.
So subscription-based models will be the same as marketplace?
No, there's 14 revenue models. We'll cover it all in month 4. You can find it on the website right now because it's posted. There's total of 16 revenue models that are out there. 14 are tech related, but services is one of those, and some of you will have a services business. Software licensing is the 16th, and it's in the process of dying. But we'll come back to revenue models later. But that's just, there's a whole bunch of research I've done in the category because I got tired of people like, I'm inventing a new revenue model. I'm like, no, you're not. Just copy one, right? So they're there to copy, but we'll cover them extensively in month 4. Okay? All right, you got about 4 more minutes. I would probably start with a positive version of what types of job are you looking for and how, I know that space a little bit well. I used to be CEO at Codefellows, so I'm a little biased on this one. But I'd start off with, hey, what type of job are you looking for and how many of those have you applied to? Because I'd want context for, are you really my target customer or not, depending on what it is you're trying to fix in the process. So again, looking a little bit for extremes and what they're looking for aspirationally, because if you can help somebody get to something they want to get to, that'll be helpful for them, okay? So you're gonna go do these first 5, it's gonna be super awkward, and the 6 through 10 will be a lot better, right? And 11 through 25 will be, you'll be like, okay, I'm kind of settling into a process. So you're gonna do 20 to 25 interviews next month. All right, so I have one last topic I wanna cover tonight. It's relatively quick. Before we get into deliverables, it's called awkward co-founder discussions. How many of you have co-founders? Awesome. Of those that have co-founders already, how many of you have documented your percentage ownership? Congratulations, I love you. For the rest of you, this is the things you should experiment with before you make some of the mistakes that some of us have made in the past. So you're going to set up a process around the fact that everyone has expectations, whether they voice them or not. So I have an expectation, Michael has an expectation. The fact that we haven't sat down and had a beer over who's going to be the CEO or who's going to own what percentage doesn't mean that he's right or I'm right. It just means we both have expectations. We haven't talked about them, right? He's gonna be CEO. This needs to happen pre-incorporation because if it happens post-incorporation, it's a huge cluster and it's super expensive. How many of you don't have co-founders yet? Congratulations, this will be super useful when you get to it. But you need to think about it going in because that first person you recruit is going to have expectations. And the question is what are they? So I'm going to give you a 2-step process to do this and some tools. So if it doesn't apply for you yet, be thankful. But when you go recruit your co-founder, just know that you have a process you can go through. So you're going to do one of 2 meetings. The first one is, why do we want to do this? And if we have to put capital in, who's going to put money in? And what's their timing of life? And is this something they're passionate about or not? And you just want to have the general discussion about, like, are we all on the same page? So I have 1 currently in college and 2 more going to college, right? So the idea of how much money do I want to put into the new company may be different than my co-founder's view of it. So I had a friend who went through a startup with 2 other co-founders. They were all kind of third, which, by the way, as a venture capitalist, if you're 50-50, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. If you're 50-50, what we look at, my opinion of it, is the first hard decision you had to make, you kicked the can. So the next hard decision, I'm concerned. Now, it could be 50.01 and 49.9. I don't care what the percentage is, but ultimately somebody has to make a decision about the business. And if you're 50-50, it works really rare occasions. I've been on the board of a company for 13 years. The 2 co-founders are equal co-founders. It's rare, like super rare. I'm super jealous, right? But I've been on their board for 13 years and I've watched the ebb and flow of it. It's not easy. So you're going to go to a startup equity calculator, which is a site called Founders. Again, follow the link. Don't worry about it right now. And what you're going to see on that is you're going to see this calculator that says, here are the names of the 4 founders. Here are the list of tasks that you need to do. And you each individually with your co-founders, by the way, not more than 4. If you're like, we have 6. No, Name a successful company that has 6 co-founders. Oh, short list. You won't find any. Remember the 3rd co-founder of Apple? Yeah, there was one. Yeah, he sold his stock really early. So you're going to go through this list, and the list is things like who's going to be the CEO, who's critical for fundraising, who's going to write the code, who's going to do this, and who's going to do that. You're going to go all the way down to the process, and there's a calculate button, and you're going to hit calculate. Then you're going to print it out, and you're going to bring it to the first beer meeting, right? Adult beverage of your choice. And Michael and I are going to sit down, and we're going to lay the papers down at the same time. And he's going to say, I'm going to be CEO. I'm like, what? I'm going to be CEO. Well, who's critical for it? Well, and the answer is who's going to do what things. So it's super awkward, but better before you incorporate than after. So step 1 is you do the calculation. I will tell you about a funny circumstance. I did this with a couple of co-founders, and they're like, we'd like you to be an advisor. I'm like, no, you don't really want me to be your advisor. Just trust me. And I'm like, so I'm going to walk you through this process. And one of them didn't bring the printout. And I'm like, oh, so you didn't like the results? Oh, no. I'm like, bullshit. You didn't like the results. So you didn't print it out, right? So awkward. Less for me than his co-founder. But you're going to use this as a process to basically like, who's going to do what and why? That's the starting point. So that's step 1. You lay down the sheets and you're going to talk about it. You may get to a second beer. You never know where it goes from there, but at least our expectations are out because it's going to calculate percentage of ownership for you. So, and if the answer is, well, I want more ownership than that, the answer is, what things are you going to do more of? So my favorite conversation in this one is, hey, when we are going to, if we have to put $10,000 into it, and you own 60% and I own 40%, that means you're putting in 6 and I'm putting in 4, right? Yeah or no? Because I've had one of my co-founder situations at one point was he had to take money out of the company. The only way for him to take money out of the company was for me to put money into the company. Right? So those conversations have to take place before the need to happen is there. You were going to say something.
I've just got a question. I'm curious.
Go for it.
You just described an algorithm with coefficients.
Mhm.
So let's just pretend there's 2 variables,
Mhm.
capital and time.
Yep.
Did you use equivalent coefficients? Did you weight them?
So the first one is really expectations, but it's a great question. Let me go to the second one. So part 2 meeting, you're going to use this thing called slicing pie. And slicing pie then starts to go from expectations to actual deliverables. And you're going to track who contributes what and when. Because part 2 of awkward co-founder conversations is, hey, you wanted to be CEO and go raise money, but you haven't raised any money. Like, who's actually doing the work? And you're going to start tracking with meeting 2 this tool called slicing pie that says, hey, how many slices of the pie do I get? Who's contributing what from a time and contribution perspective? Who's putting money in? Who's taking money out? Because that's the way you're going to track going forward who gets what percentage of equity going forward. So the first one is expectations to start. The second one is the expectation going forward and tracking actual contribution. So awkward conversation 2 is, hey, if they're out of whack, again, people have expectations whether they voice them or not. This just is a forcing function to have the conversation. So, yeah.
And is it at this point that you would have a conversation about reserving equity for employees or anything along those lines? Or
Yep.
would you hold off on that until you're looking at a cap table?
Yep. So at the founding stages, here's what's going to happen: is you and your co-founders are going to found the company on 100%, and then as you bring on additional people, you're going to create a pool at that point. But the day you incorporate, you are granted shares. So Michael and I are going to form a company, and he's going to get 60% and be CEO. I'm going to get 40%, and we're going to file that with the state of Delaware, by the way, not Washington. So just do it once, trust me. We can go through all the mechanics of why. But we're going to file that, and we're going to be granted those shares at a basis of roughly 0.0001 cents a share. Right? So now we own those shares. You're going to do what's called a reverse vesting schedule. Because if I leave 1 year into it, Michael needs my shares back in order to hire somebody to replace me. Right? So you're like, but I founded the company. And the answer is, we founded the company, but you didn't stay with the company. So what you end up with on the cap table is this weird percentage assigned to a person. You're like, who's that person? You're like, oh, he was a co-founder, he didn't stay. And you're like, I'm not going to fund that. You've created an unfundable company, right? So it's called non-participating equity. So somebody still owns a third of the company and they're working at Microsoft. And you're like, sorry, you've put yourself in a bad state and you're not going to be funded, because I want to get 25% of the company and I'm looking at that person who's not doing anything and getting 30% of the company. Not a fan. So you create a mechanic there that's called reverse vesting. It's the same thing as an option pool, but the difference is you're granted the shares at the day of the incorporation, and that starts the clock ticking on capital gains versus regular income, which some of you are like, oh, that's really interesting, but not Dave. And the answer is, oh no, it's interesting, because the rate you're going to pay for taxes are substantially different. And if you sell the company and you're paying regular income versus capital gains, it makes a big difference. You're going to file what's called an E3B election. So we'll go through this legal stuff with office hours for those of you who have not incorporated. For those of you who've already incorporated and didn't hear about an E3B election, I'm sorry, the window has passed. But because you only have 30 days after the time you incorporate to do it. So this is how you maintain it going forward. But at the day that we incorporate, we're granted those shares. The clock starts ticking on capital gains. And then when you grant additional options, that's coming out of a new pool. So to keep it simple, let's call it 10 million shares. So Michael has 6 million shares. I have 4 million shares. We decided we want to create 20% pool or 2 million shares in options to give to my first 3 employees. So they're going to have a stock grant is options, and that's going to have a vesting schedule with a cliff vest and a price per share. Their price per share is going to be above our incorporation price. It's not going to be 0.0001 cents a share. It's going to be 5 cents a share or 10 cents a share, right? So that's the way the mechanics are going to work. And then when you sell additional shares, let's call it $1 a share, you raise $2 million, you've added 2 million more shares. So now you've gone from 10 million shares, 12 million shares, now we're at 14 million shares. So you're always diluting down from your original incorporation. You're not selling your shares. So just so everybody's clear, right? So when we go raise money, we're creating shares out of thin air, in essence, and we're selling those shares. But Michael and I aren't selling our shares, right? So nobody's going to give us money for the shares. They're investing in the future of the company, which means they're new shares. That new shares causes dilution, which means all of us get diluted by another 20%. Make sense?
Is there a particular timeline on a normal vesting schedule, or is it vary?
So the question is, particular time frame on a normal vesting schedule. The answer is usually 4 years with what's called a 1-year cliff vest. So the idea of a 1-year cliff vest is you're the first employee we hire, you have a 1-year cliff vest and a 4-year vesting schedule, and we've given you 100,000 shares. So
For the founders.
well, so the first employees. So the founders have granted shares at incorporation.
Yeah.
You're going to have a reverse vesting,
Reverse vesting.
right? Because in essence, we have the shares, but if you're our first employee and we give you 100,000 shares in options, then you're going to have a reverse vesting schedule, which is typically 4 years total, with what's called a cliff vest at the end of year 1. So if you only make it 10 months and you don't get to 12 months, you get 0 shares. So pretty standard mechanic in the tech world of being 4-year vesting schedule, 1-year cliff. And then every month thereafter, 1/36 of those shares vest every month through the end of the time. So the nice thing is there's base cases for all of these, and you don't have to create them from zero. That's part of the reason we do office hours for Perkins, and they do them for free, is because it's like, I have a question about blah. And the answer is, they know the things that, they know what we're recommending, and they've created a package for us that you can incorporate for cheap, relatively speaking. Totally, yeah, it's totally cookie cutter. So, yeah.
What happens if you made all of the wrong decisions around incorporation?
Well, good news is you're not the first one. Yeah, so the question was, what happens if you made all the wrong decisions? There's lots of wrong decisions to make. It's part of the reason you hire an attorney that knows startup world versus an attorney that doesn't. Some things like, hey, we started as an LLC, that's fine. You can convert an LLC to a C Corp. So just a quick note on, so everybody understands the difference between an LLC and a C Corp. Not at the level of detail that the lawyers would want you to understand it, but they get paid by the hour and I don't. So an LLC is perfectly fine if you first incorporate. But if you ever go to take investor money, so a 1099 creates what's called a K1. This happens to be the season of the year where I get my K1s from LLCs. If you're like, oh, we're late, we didn't really make any money last year, so we're kind of late doing our taxes and it was kind of expensive, and I'm waiting on my K1. I can't file my taxes until you give me the frickin' K1. So as an investor, do I want to wait for you? No. So a C Corp basically has deferred earnings and deferred expenses. So if we lose money one year and we make money one year, they offset. An LLC is what's called a pass-through entity. You lose money one year, I get a deduction. You make money one year, I show that I make money. Most early stage startups aren't going to pay that money out to me. So you're going to show that I made money, but you're not going to give me any money to actually pay my taxes. I don't want that either, right? So most, for sure, institutional investors are going to force you to be a C Corp, and they're going to force you to be a Delaware C Corp. You can start as an LLC, that's totally okay, but just know that that's the direction you're going to go. The difference in the whole filing process is $1,000 versus $1,500. Just do it right the first time. There's reasons to do others, happy to take alternates, but in general, you can sit down with one of the law firms and say, this is what I need to fix. And believe me, all of us have made mistakes on it at least once. That's why we're like, just do it this way. Like, well, what about just do it this way? So it's easier and cheaper in the long haul. Okay, yeah?
Question on the first bullet, milestones.
Yep.
It sounds to me that at that point you already have a pretty good idea of the roadmap.
So if you think of meeting 1 to meeting 2, it's expectations. And when Michael and I start this thing, we love each other. We're excited about the future of it. Things are going great. And then we decide who's going to quit their day job and who's going to work full time without benefits and who's going to stay and get paid. So before you leave your day job, the reason you're doing the 6-month startup program is you're going to build out a product roadmap. So I'll give you a quick track record announcement of this is no big surprise to anybody who knows me. The companies that we invest in that hit their milestones, we continue to invest in. The companies that miss their milestones, yeah, tough. Like we don't, if the team is like, this team kicks ass and they hit milestones, the answer is we love them. We will help them get funded. And then they're like, then we have this team that kind of never hits their milestones. Either they were super ambitious and not realistic about the milestones, or they were slightly naive about it. It doesn't really matter why, but if I look at our portfolio of companies for both sets, or the set of money I still manage and the old set I used to manage, if you hit your milestones, we love you. Like we will help you raise the next round of funding. We're like totally behind you. But if you're like, we're not communicating our expectations or our milestones and deliverables and we're missing them all the time, that one's tough. So you should have a product roadmap at very least, and you're going to get that in month 4, right? So when it comes back to the stuff you're doing on a weekly, monthly basis, you're going to do weekly stand-ups. Are we hitting our deadlines and milestones? How many interviews is Nick going to do this week versus how many interviews I'm going to do this week? How are we dividing and conquering? Are we hitting our milestones or not? This is just people management at that point. But at least you've decided from beer number 1 who's going to be CEO and who's holding who accountable. Okay? All right. I'm not going to have you write up the exercises because we are at time. So let me give you a quick stuff on deliverables here. Next session, March 13th, value proposition, product features, and expenses is how much it will cost you to build it. So we'll talk about how to write a spec, what the features are you're going to ship, and then how you're going to take that to Upwork or somebody similar to say, this is what I want to have you build. Okay? Your deliverables for this month, resources will be in the email I send you. Your deliverables are you're going to build a competitive landscape. You're going to keep building that every month. So next month when you come back and meet with the mentors, you're going to be like, oh, here's the competitors I found out about this month. You're going to do customer development. If you're B2B, you're going to do 20. If you're B2C, you're going to do 50. Wow, that's a huge number. Yes. The faster you do it, the better it will be. And the last one is you're going to schedule your co-founder first meeting before you leave here tonight if your co-founder's with you and you haven't divided up your equity. And you're going to bring back those numbers or email me the equity splits that you've agreed to. You're sending it to each other. You're just going to CC me. So somebody's documented it. Don't call an attorney to have me verify it later. I just want you to document it with each other. Hey, we had this conversation. You're going to take 51. I'm going to take 49. You're going to take 60. I'm going to take 40. Right? Whatever that math is, I just want you to be very clear with your co-founders. It's documented, because one of the things the attorneys are going to ask you is, how are you going to split the equity? We haven't talked about it yet. So they do a package deal on helping you incorporate, but the average startup attorney who's really good in town is about $6.50 an hour. You want to minimize those discussion times. And they bill in 6-minute increments. So when you call, the clock starts. And that's the first 6 minutes. So you want to answer these questions for yourself before you need to do it. Okay? All right.